Check,
one
check.
of our notes. We didn't put it out.
Started with the B2 Zone District discussion, and Jocelyn Mills, Community Development Director. You want to start that?
Yes, thank you very much. With me also is Carol Kuhn, our senior planner. And this evening, we want to follow up with you all on next conversation about B2 and some proposed changes that you may want to consider. So quickly, we want to go over the moratorium, the existing regulations, the amendment consideration that we want to bring forward this evening, the timeline, and then end it with some questions and time for you to give us direction. As you know, Council directed staff to create a moratorium for 90 days on June 14th. Since then, we've sent letters to all the property owners in the B2 zone district to let them know what is going on. And we have had about 7 projects that have contacted us, either wanting to submit or contemplating submitting, that we needed to let them know that they had to be on hold until this moratorium is done in 90 days. And then we've posted all the information also on Littleton Plans for people to find out what's going on. And please note, just to reiterate, the moratorium is prospective, which means it does not apply to any application that is already in process or pending. It is all for new things moving forward. That's what the moratorium was passed saying. Quickly, to remind everyone, existing B2 is primarily commercial uses, and it ranges goods and services to meet the needs of the surrounding community. And the size ranges are 100,000 to 300,000 square feet. Building-wise. Lot requirements, there's no minimum lot area. Unobstructed open space is 20%. There's no minimum height. There's a maximum floor area ratio, and there's no minimum setbacks. Yeah? Sure. To meet this particular requirement, no. It's open space, unobstructed open space, so it's more, it doesn't just mean that you have to have trees and landscaping. You can provide for other things as well. But no, it's not, you can't do cash in lieu. Then there are also some supplemental standards for this zone district. There are a number of principal structures that you can have on the site. And then within that open space, the unobstructed open space, 20% required for the whole lot, and then 50% of that 20% has to be evenly distributed along the rights of way. And then the third thing to note in the supplemental standards is it does allow for residential occupancy in non-residential districts, which are the business districts, B1 and B2. So based on the feedback from the joint study session that Council had with Planning Board at the end of June, we'd like to bring back a new idea for you to think about. And that is to consider residential uses in the B2 zone district to be considered a conditional use, looking at the B2 zone district, primarily it is a commercial zone district. It does allow residential uses when certain criteria are met, and it may make sense to consider moving the provision to allow residential uses into the conditional use chapter of the zoning code. It's chapter 8 of our zoning code is where we address conditional uses today. And uses are considered conditional when they may have a greater impact to the surrounding properties, and they may be allowed in that particular location if it's determined to be compatible with the adjacent properties and the surrounding neighborhood. And this review and determination is made by the planning board. And this is just the list of, in order to receive conditional use approval, the determination is made based on this list: the nature of the site, the size of the lot, the arrangement of the structures, the vehicular and pedestrian traffic movements, landscaping, open space lighting, signage, as well as all of the other applicable zoning code requirements must be met. And then this is just showing you specifically in the land use table in our current code where we would put the conditional use. And please note too that in the city right now, we do have a variety of conditional uses that are conditional throughout our whole city and throughout the different zone districts. So this would not be the only conditional use. And then here's just the specific verbiage that is currently in our code relative to allowing residential use in the B2 and B1 zone districts. So all of this would be moved over, and you would still have to meet all of these criteria. It would just be part of the conditional use process. One item to note, and council may or may not want to take this on, as you can read here, this is a requirement for both residential uses in B2 as well as the B1 zone district. So you may want to contemplate that for the B1 zone district. And I think we looked it up, and there's about, the B1 zone district has about
25 properties of B1.
It's not a huge amount of volume, and they tend to be smaller in size throughout the city. And on our map that you have, we do have that shown.
I can pull up the B1 map.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, that'd be good.
Oh, yes, I could pull up the B.
Yeah. So if you want to further have that conversation, we can get additional maps. But this just is generally what the provisions are currently in the code, and we would consider just moving all of the same just into the conditional use section of the code. Then the other thing that, I'm sorry.
Before you move on, I just wanted to add. So the last time council met with planning board and there was that discussion, and the vast majority of you expressed concerns or interest in somehow establishing a public process, and specifically for the residential use. And the proposal that Jocelyn's brought forward, I think, gets to that without concerns of other issues surrounding changing things in the zoning code. So I hope you realize that this is trying to be responsive to that discussion that was had a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Along those lines, too, to add what Mike is saying, I think the other thing that taking notes from that prior conversation, there's a lot of conversation, too, about in our code right now, in B2, there's no maximum building height and there are no setback provisions. But what is in that district is floor area ratio. And generally, floor area ratio is another planning tool to address size and scale and mass. And so we wanted to just give you a quick tutorial on floor area ratio and some review that we've done about how it's impacted or how it's been used in the B2 zone district. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol for this quick part.
So you can see in the diagram that floor area ratio is the relationship of the building size and how it relates to the lot area. So it's calculated using the gross floor area. So that's the whole, every floor in the building. And then making it into a ratio between the gross floor area and the lot area. So you can see in the little formula down below, you would take B and C, add them together, and then you would divide that over the site area to get the floor area ratio. So in B2, the maximum floor area ratio is 2:1, and that means you get twice as much gross square footage as the total square footage of the site. So these are different ways to slice it. So if you took a 1 acre site and you had a floor area ratio, you would have 2 acres of building above it. So that's the first one with an FAR of 2.0. You can also shove it all in the corner and have an 8-story building all in the back quarter of a 1 acre lot. And then you can have a 4-story building on a 1 acre lot if you shove it in the back half of it. So it just kind of gives you the different ways to slice it. So B1, though, has a different floor area ratio, just to keep that in mind, the difference between B1 and B2. That's considered more of the smaller neighborhood commercial type uses. So then regulations that do impact the floor area ratio. So since there isn't a maximum height in B2, there are no setbacks. So what you have, the regulations that are in place are open space. So you have 20% open space requirement and a floor area ratio of the 2:1. So you do limit the size of the site based on the parking requirements and the open space requirements. So you can't really fill up. So if you go back to these other slides, you could never get to the full any one of these because you have the parking requirements too. So the larger the building, the more parking you need. And you also have just 20% right off the bat that can't be developed because of the open space. And so we've looked at an average of the B2 zone district floor area ratios kind of in pods and clumps, clumped areas around like along Littleton Boulevard, and then some other areas that made logical sense. We came up with an average throughout the city. And so you can see that they're 0.5, a little bit above 0.5, all the way up to approaching 1.5. So some of the pieces that can impact that are, the residential component in it, and also a parking garage, like an internal parking garage, could impact the floor area ratio. So I can turn it back to Jocelyn if that makes sense to go back over.
So what that previous slide, let's just go back to it, is really showing you is that today, as properties have been developed in the B2 zone district, we have not really ever reached that 2:1 floor area ratio. It's been well below that. But the trend has been when there is residential as a component of that, we've achieved greater floor area ratio numbers based on our general average that we did of all the areas of the city that are built that are in the B2 district.
So when you calculate your FAR, does it need to be enclosed space? In other words, if you had somebody wanted to go up and you had 2 floors of parking that was open on the side, say a 2-level structure open on the side, does that count as building space?
Open on the side does not, but if it's anything fully enclosed would count as part of the structure. Yes, yeah. So in that research, going back to the idea of moving residential uses as a conditional use in B2, does appear as when you add the residential into a project, you do get a bigger floor area ratio. So by moving that component to be processed as a conditional use, the determination to approve it at that location, adjacent in that neighborhood and adjacent to the adjacent next door properties, all of this list of criteria would have to be met in order for that to be determined to be appropriate in that particular location. That is. Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, currently in the code, that is correct. If a decision is made by the planning board, the applicant, if they would like to, they may appeal that to the city council. That's correct. So moving on, the other thing that we do want to bring forward is a requirement that for any project, any development projects, so that would be PDOs, GPDPs, conditional uses, and rezoning. So any application that comes before planning board and or city council, we would like to add an additional notice provision that Written notice would be provided to all property owners within 300 feet of the application prior to the public hearing. So another way to outreach and provide public notice to the community. Just wanna-
And currently in the code, we do not have a provision for the written notice. So this would be another mechanism to get the word out to the abutting adjacent property owners within that radius.
Our time frame is still generally the same. So we are at the second round bullet on the council direction. From here, getting direction this evening, we would like to move to a community open house on Thursday, to outline the proposed changes and to receive community feedback on them. And then planning board hearing would be July 25th. City council first reading would be August 16th, and then second reading would be September 6th.
Given the date of today, how are you going to give notice, since I thought you were saying depending on what we say tonight, then you'd give notice. So how will people get notice?
No, I'm sorry. We've already noticed the meeting on the 14th. You all will give us final direction, so we will finalize the information that will be presented on Thursday.
Okay. And that's gone out to,
It's gone out to all property owners, to
The B2 property.
B2 property owners. We have it posted on Littleton plans for the community to see it. Contractors and developers, and really anyone that we've been able to hand out information to, we've been letting people know.
And also, we have a list of people that have signed up through PAL that want to be informed of all development projects within the city, and they also received an email of the postcard that was sent out.
so are you intending also to post something to the whole city?
Yes, whatever we will.
Website.
Yeah, it's on the website. And Littleton plans, we put everything on Littleton plans.
Well, yeah, but putting it on the website's different from noticing in a way that, like through nextdoor.com,
Yep.
hey, folks.
Yep.
Now, if
Yep,
people,
we will do that as well.
I mean, I
Yep.
appreciate if we do that.
Uh-huh.
So
Yep.
I just, the more people can
Absolutely.
be notified, the better things
Absolutely.
are, I
Yep.
think.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Good point. So with that,
Any questions?
Summarize, just a summary of what the real issue is.
it's my understanding that council directed staff to put this moratorium into place in order for us to review the code provisions to ensure that council feels that they are being laid out in the manner that we would like based on the location of the B2 properties throughout the city.
For our joint meeting with the planning commission, I had the feeling that many of us walked in here. I mean, you're just taking action.
Well, I mean, I believe that we had a lot of conversation, and then I felt that the direction that everyone collectively was providing us, and it was different from everyone, was that the proposal we had then was maybe too much to take on. So to reconsider that and rethink about what options we have in the existing code. And in the existing code, we already have a whole process and a chapter about conditional use. And it did seem the other thing that was one of the main themes out of that study session was just getting our hands around when things are appropriate in specific locations. So it seems based on the floor area, looking at all the buildings that have been built, that the larger structures with more mass tend to be when there's a contemplation of residential use in B2. So it would still allow residential use to be contemplated in B2. It just would have an additional layer of review. Yeah. That is correct, yes. Yep. And I would say it's based on you letting staff know that we wanted to put a moratorium in place in order to have this conversation.
So has the city attorney opined on if moving from a true use by right to a conditional use constitutes any sort of a taking? I mean, you can be sued for anything at any time. Is that
Yes, so as I mentioned in the staff communication, absolutely, we brought it through legal counsel, and certainly anything that comes forward in the, the actual ordinance, we would also make sure that it went through legal counsel. And generally, vested property rights are locked into place, if you will, once you've actually submitted an application on a piece of property. At that point in time is whatever the code is, at that moment is what your vested property right is. So in this case, what we're doing is proposing a change to all applications in the B2 zone district. So would not be considered takings. Future, I'm sorry, yes, future, yes, thanks. Good clarification.
So this won't go into effect until council acts on this. What if there were a whole bunch of folks tomorrow just decide they want to put an application in just to have it on the books?
Well, in that moratorium that you passed, you've put a hold on, we cannot accept any applications
So it's
until
an accepted one?
Correct,
Okay.
yes,
And
yep.
since,
anything future. So
Okay,
like I
that's
said,
fine.
we've had conversations with people and we've had to tell them that they cannot submit an application right now because of this moratorium. But assuming we get through this and make changes by the date and the second reading is on the 6th, then we'll have met that 90 days. And I guess, Peggy, the other thing to remember too is that we will bring whatever direction you guys give us to that public conversation on Thursday. We also will post the information on Littleton Plan, so if people aren't able to come to the meeting on Thursday, they can submit comments by the Littleton Plans as well.
And also, don't forget, this has to go through an entire council process to change this process. So
Right.
they'll have opportunities through the
That's
public
true,
hearing
public hearing
process.
process too, yeah.
And the reason why we're trying to stick with this schedule is to stay within that moratorium because we are getting calls and people wanting to move forward with applications. And we don't want to hold up anybody any longer than we needed to. So staff has been responding to things as quickly as possible.
thank you.
Any other questions? Did you have another question?
Go ahead.
Just a couple comments too. I mean, it was severe, without a doubt. It was severe to do a moratorium on this. But I think that one of the things that became apparent was particularly where our B2s are and some of the, kind of the extreme opportunity on a B2 and in some of those locations to, not have the height restriction and to have the setback issue. More than anything, I think it was just trying to be very considerate of what our intentions are in our areas of redevelopment and to not always let old zoning and old signs guide or force us into something we may not want. I think this is a good step. It's a gentle step. I think that's absolutely, as Phil eloquently put, no reduction in rights is hugely important, and I think we need to continue to emphasize that because I've had a couple calls from developers who do have projects in B2s that are concerned. So that's, I think, important that we're not violating any of those and intentionally being very, very good. And I also think adding the additional opportunity for community input in this process is important because that's in the changes you're making here, because I think that's part of what is, particularly in the Grove, was an issue, is that there just was no opportunity for that public moment. And so I think it in my opinion, it's close to where I feel comfortable with it. I'm interested to hear the community input, and I would just emphasize, and I'm sure you guys have already thought about it, but just as clear and outside baseball as we can get, because this stuff is really complicated, and I want. But, I'm okay with what you presented here going. Anybody else have any problems with that?
No? It's good to go.
Great, thank you. Oh,
You said you've had to turn away a couple applications. What general area are they?
They were along Littleton Boulevard,
that was one of them.
that was one of them, and
Windermere.
Windermere,
And Broadway.
Broadway,
Just in that.
and then,
Well,
Windermere,
not-
comma, Broadway, yeah.
Comma, not
Yeah,
and, sorry, comma.
Comma, Windermere,
Comma.
pause, sorry.
Yeah.
And then we had some other
Some
questions.
downtown?
One downtown, and then a question about down below county line, stuff that's in Douglas County.
Yeah.
There's an empty lot down there, so concern about that one as well. And there were a couple others. We've gotten just some calls and about some, we also had somebody inquire about some cellular communication stuff in a couple of the B2s, and we've had to tell them there's a moratorium. So there's been 7 or so applications, and one that was actually submitted and had to be turned away, so.
Yeah, and be mindful too that they're not huge buildings that are being proposed. Some of these are just improvements to their property that they can't do because of the moratorium.
Right, yes.
We're really only talking 6 weeks.
90 days.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And is
yeah.
there something in place for you guys to reach out to these?
Oh, yes, yes, yep.
We've been keeping track of the names. We had, one was for a conditional use, but per the moratorium, you can't do a conditional use in it, so there were questions like that. It wasn't even like exterior modifications, but the use was changing. So there's small things like that, or I want to add an outdoor seating area and
Yeah.
a gazebo area, and I can't, so.
It wasn't
small
all
things.
big, you're right, it
Yeah, it's
wasn't
not
all
like a
big,
whole
so-
new big development somewhere.
For all 7, yeah. So, but yes, we'll keep everyone apprised and certainly back out to the property owners.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
So we will be preparing some boards and explaining the pieces to that. One question for council is the 300-foot, is that something that you're comfortable with on the public notice piece for the written? So we had presented 3 options last time, and so we went with the middle, which was the 300. We feel that's
Yeah.
appropriate. It's consistent.
It's consistent with other
jurisdictions.
jurisdictions, and it gets you that or surrounding neighborhood, if you will.
I'm forgetting we've used something that was in the state statutes a few times in terms of notifying.
And that was some of it's abutting property owners. This, we went out a farther radius. Rather than 250, some jurisdictions use 250, but some use 500. 500 seemed a little big. You could hit a lot of, that's a lot of stuff.
But I agree, currently, we've been looking at it, and if the state had required written notice, then yes, we've been providing that. But generally, we want to just say across the board for anything that comes before planning board and/or council on a land use application, we'll receive that written notification.
So the state one that I'm remembering, I think I'm remembering, doesn't apply to home rule cities, but we used it
Oh,
as
okay.
a good outreach before, so.
Okay, well, this will just make it a standard requirement, and all the developers will know that, and everyone will have to abide by the same rules.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now, take
Where's the thing?
a couple minutes.
Doug, can you roll right into it, or you need a
Yeah.
little break? Couple minutes?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
You're welcome.
Minutes, not more. Doug, are you going to start?
Yes, I'm not quite ready.
Mark, did you want to sing or dance?
I like the way you're flowing this, though.
Well,
I think it'll go.
I can do a little minor introduction
I was going to
here.
say, you do not want me to sing.
So if you recall, Mark, Doug, and I made a presentation back in May, I believe it was. Was it May or March?
May 24th.
May 24th, thank you. And that was kind of a overview of what's going on in the state of infrastructure in the city and some of the challenges we have in funding some of those improvements. This gets down to a little bit more of a honed view, looking specifically at 5 years and a fiscally constrained plan that we'd like to review with council as we move into budget and make sure that what we're talking about and how we're proposing to address capital needs in the city is in line with what your thinking is. Because from a staff's perspective, we move into budget discussions next week. So this is an important time to address these things and make sure that where we're at is in line with what you're thinking. So
Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much for the introduction. We're going to tag team a little bit tonight with me and Mike and Mark, each taking some of the slides here. So tonight's topic is the 5-year fiscally constrained capital plan. And our primary objective is to establish a 5-year plan that's fiscally constrained, so something that is really realistic and workable. In May, as Mike iterated, we did talk to council about a 15-year capital plan, kind of looking at a longer-term horizon. And this time we're trying to hone it into a more workable plan and talk to council about some financing options over a 5-year period. We also hope to garner some council direction on possibly investing more available resources into street maintenance capital projects, as that is a large portion of the capital needs, as you saw in the 15-year capital plan.
So I think when we had that discussion about the streets and so forth, I think we said getting those in shape helps us ultimately get more revenue, because it makes the city a more attractive place for people to buy homes and businesses and so forth. Is that?
I think that, yeah, there's a lot of positives to the streets. Obviously, you want to attract more citizens, more traffic, more businesses, and just maintain your infrastructure overall.
Right.
And it maintains the property values for the city and for the citizens.
Yeah. But I mean, there is, the research, I think, around the country shows that we will generate more revenue if we do that. I don't mean we'll necessarily be rolling in revenue, but that this is a wise approach.
Absolutely. I might add that not only is it just purely a wise investment here for just the streets themselves, but there is research that shows that so goes your streets, so goes the value of the property adjacent to that street. So there is a direct correlation over time. And so I think that is fair to say.
Thank you.
This is a slide from the May council presentation. As you can see, it's a long-term 15-year horizon on the expected funding gap for these types of particular projects that we've categorized over the 15-year horizon. As you can see, that blue portion is the street improvements. And the funding gap that has been calculated over that period of time is $104 million. And you can see that the dashes there, we also have the revenues, and it comes up far short of the project needs over that 15-year time period.
And also at the May 24th presentation, we shared with you this particular chart, which kind of ranks the city of Littleton in our pavement quality index compared to other cities in the state of Colorado. We also talked about this PCI quality target of 70 to 75, and obviously we're far short of that. And so again, one of the main reasons why we're here this evening is because of that discussion at May 24th was council asking staff if there's some way that we could look at some financial options to perhaps address this issue. Yes.
Go back a slide, okay.
So the blue above that white line. Street improvements?
That's correct. That big wide blue portion there, that street.
Then you said.
And then the
Okay, I said, no, never mind.
So as you move down the key there at the top, those are the colors as you move down.
Yeah, I see what I was, thank you.
Yep, and we just kind of layered them on top of each other there. So what are some of the shorter-term financial options available to the city? Staff has discussed this, and we've come up with some options that council could consider over the next 5 years. Number one would be spending down the capital projects fund balance. There has been some capital projects fund balance built up over the years. We also have some ongoing revenues that I'm going to share on the next slide. But the 5-year project needs do greatly outweigh the available resources. So we are recommending using the capital projects fund balance as a financial tool. Another possible available fund balance resource would be in the general fund. Right now there's a general fund reserve policy that council adopted in 2011 of a range of 8 to 18%. And currently council has kind of set a target or a peg amount of 17% of operating expenditures every year as a reserve fund balance. And that's generally the best practice is 2 months of operating expenses as a reserve. But that reserve amount is kind of on the lower end when we compare Littleton to other cities. But that would be a short-term financing mechanism if council decided to use kind of a lower end of the 18% range. And in order to look at more longer-term financial options, we kind of talked about that. It would take more strategic planning and a little bit more time. So that would probably need to start next year in order to discuss maybe how we would meet some of those longer-term needs after the 5-year plan.
Sure. And if you recall in that presentation we gave in May, we talked some about using or proposing a potential sales tax increase. There may have been mention of a lodging tax increase. Some of those things, there isn't time now to address those this year. And it's something that we'd have to establish more of a conversation within the community on before moving forward. There is a great deal of support. Well, it appears to be a great deal of support just given the polling that we've done already within the community survey and the business survey, coming in close to 70% support or somewhat support. And I think that's something to consider as we move into 2017. Related to this, there are some concerns that have been brought forward as well. Some neighborhoods are looking at ways to fix their own streets through the use of special improvement districts and things like that. And we've heard both from neighborhoods that have private streets and neighborhoods that are on public streets that they're more than willing to tax themselves in their neighborhood to address their street issues. My concern with that is then you develop these areas of have and have-nots, and you really, it doesn't get at a citywide solution. And so moving forward, I think it's best that we discuss this and that it be a citywide solution rather than a piecemeal solution, neighborhood by neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Any other questions regarding that? Peggy and then Phil?
So I think I asked this before when we talked about this, but the Tabor limits. So would we in any way be pushing the Tabor limits so we'd have to ask the voters to allow us to exceed that?
Not at this point, at least I can say for 2015.
But I'm thinking in what you've laid out,
As far as those two options
Yeah.
specifically?
No, I don't think we're going to be in danger of Tabor as far as these financing mechanisms.
okay, thanks. I just get it out there.
Sure, that's a good question. And then I think Phil had a question as well.
Yeah, as we start to take a look at this, and I'll ask you to go back 2 slides, I think. What we're talking about here doesn't address one of our bigger citizen issues, which is dealing with congestion relief. So this is to some extent, putting all our eggs in the basket of trying to address primarily street infrastructure, maybe a bit other infrastructure in the city. But it does not get to the citizen issue of congestion relief.
That is correct. You're actually getting to our punchline at the end. We have a summary, and we're about, after we get through this, to tell you what this could fund and what it will not be funding if this is the path that council would take. But that is absolutely correct. Based on a lot of this discussion, any kind of serious congestion relief, we do not foresee that, or at least we've not projected it into this 5-year fiscally constrained plan. And we certainly could talk at length about congestion relief. I think that's obviously a very difficult and very expensive, but there's also some strategies that quite honestly have to do with our signal system. If we were to improve that, its efficiency would relieve congestion. But if we're looking for, significant projects like relief at Santa Fe and Mineral, and I know that there's been some discussion about that, that is a much longer discussion. Personally, I believe the time is near for us to perhaps consider a project like that and to work it through the local Dr. Cog process. I think I've shared with you before, I've been through many of these before, 10 years, 15 years, but it takes a long concerted effort to really pursue projects like this. If you don't start, it never will happen. And in the case of, say, Santa Fe and Mineral, nobody's going to lead that issue except us. It will not be CDOT. It will not be the county. If we want to solve a problem like that, we will have to take the lead. Personally, we've had some discussion internally about whether or not we propose to council that we actually start the environmental process with CDOT. We've had some very informal conversations with them about Santa Fe and Mineral, as an example. I may be getting off topic a little bit, but obviously, CDOT's been doing some studies about the impacts of Sterling Ranch on Santa Fe. And their environmental work so far is taking that just north of C470. Doesn't answer the question of what happens after that. We obviously know there'll be impacts that hit Santa Fe and Mineral. And so that's why we've had some internal discussions about maybe it's time to start the environmental work to carry this process through the intersection, at least at Mineral.
So, Mark, the follow-on to that is, from what you and Doug are presenting to us, does that preclude or include initiating congestion relief projects?
Personally, I don't think it necessarily precludes. I think that's why I highly recommend a 5-year fiscally constrained plan, because it certainly helps you decide what you're going to do for the next year, but it gives you the longer view. So as we go through some of these alternatives here, you might see where we might take some of these resources and spread them out evenly over the 5 years. Council may decide, well, let's take some of those funds, put it into maintenance in the first couple of years, and then in the out years, you may want to use that for some congestion-oriented projects, Santa Fe and Mineral as an example, or traffic signal timing. There's a lot I can share with you about traffic signals that we have never addressed in this community. That's part of my punchline as well. We have a lot of work to be done there, and there's a lot of maintenance and capital issues surrounding just our signal system that we have never touched.
Well, supposedly there was a traffic signal project in conjunction with the jurisdictions along Broadway from Denver south to Highlands Ranch that hasn't seemed to improve that much.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I'll just give you one example. Sorry, Doug, we're jumping to the punchline here.
No, this is interesting stuff.
We had a traffic accident on Bellevue. I can't remember the exact intersection, where the accident took out the traffic controller. It's the computer that sits off to the side in a stainless steel cabinet, and took out the controller, so the signal was just black. Well, we have no inventory. We don't have any cabinets, spare cabinets. We don't have any spare controllers. In fact, the controllers that we have are obsolete. We can't even buy parts for them, let alone the programming becomes very difficult. And so it just so happened that our contractor that we use to kind of maintain our signal system actually had a spare in their garage. So that's what we put into the system in order for us to order and purchase a controller. A controller is $15,000 to $20,000 just for the controller. The cabinet's another $15,000 at least sometimes more expensive depending on how big it is. So, these are the kinds of things that, quite honestly, Public Works has never tried to take on. We've never really thought through kind of the ultimate maintenance of the signal system. Another example is that it's a best management practice to structurally inspect every signal pole every 5 years. To the best of my knowledge, we've never done it.
Not to disagree with you, but I might dream a lot for all I know, but I seem to remember in my time on council hearing that we did do some of what you said we didn't. Not necessarily hearing it in a council meeting, but because I didn't understand how certain things happened, I'd asked Charlie lots of questions. So I thought he explained certain things. He also, I think, explained to me why we couldn't do certain things, because if we did something on Broadway, for example, it would screw up all the other municipalities. Something to that. I'm probably misstating it, so.
There has been a lot of good work within Public Works on the system. I don't want to necessarily paint the picture that somehow it's been completely ignored. I think a lot of the improvements that have occurred over time appear to be more kind of isolated as opposed to a kind of a comprehensive maintenance program. Going back to the discussion I've had with you before about asset management, we really don't have an inventory of our signal infrastructure as an example. We've never estimated its useful life. We've never inspected much of that. So what we've done is basically, if there's been a problem, we've reacted to that. But we have done some good work working with some of the other local jurisdictions in signal timing. So there is some, again, good work that's occurred. But there's a lot more that should be done. And so getting to your question, as we look at this, you're going to notice, and we're certainly going to point out to you that we can address elevating the level of maintenance here for the streets in the short term, the long term. And that's why, again, the 5 years to me is important. There are lots of things that are not addressed.
So another question. So we're looking 5 years, roughly. Get my mic this way. We're looking 5 years, roughly. Can you hear me now, Jerry? Yeah, I can't look at you when I say that. So we could potentially spend down more, expecting that we won't have a market crash or anything else to stop some conservative revenue flow, right? I mean, that something is going to come in. So, I mean, is that possible? But then, so we could speed up what we're doing, maybe with the funding. Could we speed it up with implementation if we did that? Or is this going to exceed our ability to do a whole lot more in a given year?
I think it's a great question. I think we touched on that a little bit in May, but I think when we get to some of these specific alternatives and I show you kind of the line items that actually are impacted, let's come back to that question.
Okay.
Because I think it is relevant. Because eventually, if you get a project that's too big and you want to throw a lot of money at it in a short amount of time, that does become a very difficult implementation problem. So I have thought through that.
I figured you had.
Yes.
Thank you.
So when I look at the chart, so 5 years out really only puts us about half of the life of the 10 years. We need to crank it up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So if we do that, say for 5 or even 10 years, what else is
Another great question.
You guys are jumping ahead.
You guys are jumping ahead.
Yeah, there's a.
I can't wait for this.
Sorry, maybe we should have started with the.
Yeah, we should have started in
the end
reverse
first,
order.
I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you wouldn't
I
mind,
think
allow us
Mark
to.
will answer that question here shortly.
Yeah, I think so.
Just jumping back to the capital projects fund, these are our resources, and I think everyone is pretty accustomed to these annual resources. But most of these resources are economically sensitive. So you've got building use taxes, which could fluctuate from $500,000 to $1.5 million to $1 million. and it's going to be all over the board depending on the development market for year to year. The highway users tax is a little more steady, but it is dependent on the state legislature and what their ability is to fund the highway users tax. And then we have interest earnings and grants, which obviously the interest earnings will be going down if fund balance is reduced. And then we have a couple of grants, just a couple of small ones that we get, community development block grant for sidewalks, and we have a 911 replacement equipment for police and fire equipment. So you can see with these elastic revenue sources, there is some risk if you do use fund balance as well. And it's hard to predict how much revenue will be coming into the city each year.
Before you move on that one, Doug, so HUTF, just so you all know and understand, that's the gas tax that you pay for Colorado. And that, as Doug mentioned, that is sensitive to the legislature, and they have been tapping those funds to fund things like state patrol, driver's license bureaus, and things like that. So it's a state-collected, locally shared tax, and it's shared with both the state, and then it goes down to the counties and to the cities as well. So CDOT gets it, counties get it, and cities get it, and it's constitutionally earmarked for use in roads and related purposes. So no matter what we do, that's the funding that we have for streets in the city. And right now we're running about $1.3 million a year is what we get from HUTF.
Thank you, Mike.
So just to, on this, I don't know where it fits, but I know it fits in public works, whether it fits in infrastructure or elsewhere. Somewhere in the 5-year period, it's expected, unless there's a tremendous level of abatement, that the emerald ash borer will hit our streets. And is that being contemplated as we look out this 5-year period?
That is a discussion I have had within Public Works. We do have David Flagg, who's kind of manages our grounds operation. He has been tasked with actually developing a plan here for Littleton. It's on his work plan. So I can tell you he is involved. He is involved at a statewide level. He certainly has been involved in lots of other communities. Whatever cost we may have associated with that would probably be reflected more in our operating budget as opposed to the capital, would be probably my suggestion at this particular point. But we are aware of that issue. It is obviously rather significant.
And we've had some storm drainage failure that has occurred. Is that contemplated in the infrastructure needs that are being outlined here?
Another great question. Actually, what we're discussing here does exclude the stormwater utility and the sanitary sewer utility. So those are two separate pieces that we discuss later. But there is a challenge there that we'll talk about later in the budget process.
News at some point?
Unfortunately.
Okay.
Well,
Keep going.
yes.
Well, yeah, then I'm going to throw out of this, well, it was still bad news.
Okay.
The economist that we had last study session, whatever it was, he had said that he is anticipating the economy to go down, start going down for 7 years or thereabouts. So that was the last of the bad news. Now we want.
They love being pessimistic, that's for sure. But yeah, definitely, the cycle could very well go down, and who knows when that's going to happen.
It's another reason, quite honestly, why I like a 5-year fiscally constrained plan, so that you do get to ask those what-if questions. If the revenue does change, how does it affect our capital strategy for 5 years?
Yeah, after talking with the building department and then Jocelyn and community development, we know those two departments are going to be busy at least through next year, but after that, it's hard to see exactly what's going to be on the horizon for development after that. So, this slide takes us a little closer look as to the actual dollar amounts that are in the capital projects fund. We start off at the top with the amount available for budgeting, and that's the actual ending fund balance that we're projecting for the capital projects fund, which is $9.3 million. And that is actually net of a reserve. As a best practice, we have some lease payments that are paid out of the capital projects fund every year, which is about $1.55 million. So we've actually netted that amount, and our bottom line number is $9.3 million available for budget. So we actually reserve 1 year's annual lease payments, so we at least have that in reserve. We can make that lease payment if we need to, and it's kept in reserve. So the $9.3 million, again, is fund balance, and that can be used one time. And so our financing option here is to slowly draw that down. Are there any questions about that? I think we touched on the building use taxes and the highway users tax. You can see those amounts there. And then the general fund transfer would be any excess revenues. It's been the council's policy to transfer those excess revenues on an annual basis to the capital projects fund. So really the operating fund or the general fund really has a close relationship with the capital projects fund. So the more money that can be manufactured in the general fund can be transferred for capital. Because right now,
Strange use of the term manufactured.
Limited uses there.
Okay, so before we kind of show you how that money in that first example could be spread out over the 5 years to take on, say, street maintenance, I did want to touch a little bit on how staff kind of looked at some of our capital projects and how we kind of assessed what was a priority. So as we got into kind of the larger list, remember we had this 15-year kind of wish list and we started to constrain it. One of the things that we even touched on May 24th was looking at kind of a tiered approach. And so what you see here in the first slide is kind of talking about just that. First priority was kind of the support of the existing capital necessary for us to operate. So things like vehicles, computers, touch on a little more detail, but we saw that as existing capital or existing operations. The next piece then, whatever was left out of the project list, then we kind of stepped back and decided, well, let's try to put together kind of an evaluation criteria. So we came up with internally here, first time, needs a little practice, a little adjustment here over time, but the intent was for us to try to take all these different kinds of wish list issues and try to rate them and see if that told us anything a little differently. So we came up with a set of criteria. You see it up there on the slide: public safety, council community goals, fiscal impact, economic development, impacts on service level, and kind of the relationship or coordination with other projects. So that was a way for us to see how they all kind of compare to one another. So when we started with the first tier, again, we looked at first the leases, as Doug touched on, it's kind of the mortgage payment, got to do that. Next thing was kind of the existing vehicles, just existing, not new. This is all the support vehicles for public works, police, fire. So we know we have a replacement schedule for that.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
And I know this comes up every year, and those of us on council know it, but just touch on briefly the lease for the museum and library, because everybody thinks that is the lease it is our library, it is our museum.
Well, those were certificates of participation.
And say it for the public so they can understand it, please.
Yeah, it's actually a lease agreement. So it's called a COP, Certificate of Participation, but it's actually a lease agreement that the city has where the city has set up a separate authority like the building authority, and then we have the Littleton Building Corp for the museum and the library. And now actually we have I think it's the courthouse and the museum. But anyway, the city is actually leasing the museum and the courthouse from those other entities. And so there's a separate board that operates the museum, rental leases, and the courthouse. And so it's kind of a lease-back arrangement where the city is authorized to utilize those facilities, and then at the end of the lease term, the city will actually get custody and title to those properties.
So it was done to get money up front.
Yes, it's very similar to selling bonds up front, exactly. And then they were able to do the renovations and improvements to those.
So it isn't like the properties are going to go away even if we didn't miss a payment, if we did miss a payment.
Oh, no, they're well
away.
Secured by those properties and those
Again, I just want to make
facilities.
that clear because that's something that gets a little confusing for folks.
We renegotiated those, didn't we, a few years ago?
And a few years ago, we did a refinancing. I think that one was on the courthouse. I always get the two confused. But yes, we did refinance for a lot lower interest rate on the rental. It's really called a rental agreement.
Doug, do you want to touch, I believe, and they're staggered leases as well, so it's, one is coming due here in, what, 5 or 6 years, I think, is.
Yeah, there's one that is going to get paid off in the next few years. I think it's within the 5-year horizon, one will get paid off. And then we also have the new radio lease from Motorola that the city council authorized last fall. And so that's actually an equipment lease, so that would be part of the leases as well as the other 2 larger ones. So hopefully, but periodically we might end up, getting some more leases. So even though we might pay one off, there might be another one where we need to purchase some equipment, and if we don't have the funds available and the interest rates are low, it's a good financing mechanism to utilize.
Okay, so before we get to see kind of the results of the first alternative here, just again, we use the tiered system. So much like the earlier slide that we shared on May 24th, we started with, using the capital fund to pay the leases, existing vehicle replacement, some of our equipment that police and fire typically would look to the capital fund, and certainly our technology, computers, and so on. Then again, Doug touched on this, we're going to look at 2 alternatives. The first is using the fund balance in the capital project fund. And then the next one is if the council decided to modify the reserve policy, what resources could we bring to that alternative? So here is, again, if we decide we're going to pay all those first tier first and then look to things that are left, and we spend down the fund balance, the $9 million over 5 years, it would spread out over the street maintenance and the concrete related replacement. Again, if we're going to do street work, we're going to replace the concrete that's adjacent to that. And so you can see in the year 2017, we were spending $1.7 million and another $400,000 on concrete. And so that is roughly the status quo. And so we could use that reserve and maintain that status quo, but you can tell that even in the out years, year 2020 and year 2021, we start to actually decrease even the level of street maintenance. And so the $9 million that's in reserve for the capital project fund really is limited. It's not going to get us ultimately to that goal either.
And just so it's clear, that $9 million is one-time money. So once you spend it down, it's gone.
And so you can see in the year 2021 on the very bottom in that green row, $341,000. That's the balance left for that year. There's nothing left except for the revenue that we would normally collect in the following year.
This was one of our goals that we wanted to talk to council about. If we wanted to go a little further, our alternative 2 would be incorporating a modified general fund policy where we would actually utilize some of that 17% that I was alluding to as far as the general fund reserve. And so this would actually be an alternative, and if a council decided direction was to fund some of that street maintenance, so we actually start taking care of the streets a little bit more and the curb and gutter and the sidewalks, we would propose using $1 million a year of the general fund balance and donating that, directing that towards street maintenance. And so you can see here the ending fund balance after those additional projects. And then, again, this is the capital projects fund. We'll have another slide here to talk about the general fund, but this would leave the general fund balance at 10% at the end of 2021, so drawing it down approximately 7% over the next 5 years.
And that, I'm forgetting, that would leave us, what, about a month's operating expenses?
A little bit over a month. 1 month is about 8%, and that's the bare minimum that council has an adopted reserve policy. Tabor is 3%, and then 5% would be for economic downturns. And that's kind of another way how best practice arrives at that 8%, which is 1 month's worth of operating expenditures. But like I said, that really is, we're at the low part of the range right now compared to other cities. A lot of cities might have 25, 30% as their fund balance reserve, but it really does depend on what your ongoing revenues are. We do have some stability because we get the fire contract reimbursements, but then we have some elastic revenue sources because we're dependent on sales taxes. So I think when I looked at it for 2017, it's about 60%, which could be considered economically sensitive. with the building permit revenues and plan check revenues. So that's one thing to consider. So, I mean, obviously that's a severe and serious consideration to draw down your fund balance. That leaves some risk for the future. And it is one-time money. Once that is spent, it is spent.
Well, I'm uncomfortable, to say the least, because what it does is it restricts future options, because anything we would want to be doing as far as an application for regional funds would require a local match. And what this does is essentially moves us out of any possibility of that, which puts us in a very dire position, and I'm uncomfortable.
Would you mention a couple of the kinds of things for local matches?
Suppose we're talking about, and Mark can add to this, but suppose we're talking about any kind of solution, whether we're talking about Broadway, or we're talking about Mineral in Santa Fe, or Main Street in Santa Fe. Any of those, if you're going to make an application for regional dollars that come through the feds, that would essentially be a grant request, that's going to require a minimum of a 20% match on that. And the way the current scoring works on those applications, the higher level of match that you can make, the better likelihood you have of gaining some funds. And recognizing in any one of those, the dollar amount that we've just, if we went this particular route, that we would need for a local match would pale. So unless we're already in a position to have partners, whether it's Arapahoe County or anyone else in any of those, we're in a tough spot.
So help me understand this. So.
Well, I was going to just turn it over to Mark, and so he can elaborate.
So I'm asking here, but if I'm wrong, if we did some of the grant match stuff, that would change these numbers too, because it would reduce some of the expenditures that we're looking at right out of our.
Those dollars couldn't be used for maintenance. This is a congestion relief solution.
Yeah, but some of what we were talking about, I thought.
Those project dollars are not incorporated in these numbers. I don't think.
No.
Mark's
Oh,
still
no.
trying to identify. He would have to do an
Okay.
environmental study, which would be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
And I think Phil is alluding to that, where the city could possibly leverage some grants if we matched
Gotcha.
some money on our own, but
I
that
just
would.
need help in understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, I think, again, we're kind of getting to our punchline, I guess, here again, but you take these alternatives to their fullest extent, yes, you would reduce your flexibility, if nothing else. And so these are intended, again, as a planning tool to help you understand, the pros and cons, the consequences of whatever action we take in not only the short term, but the long term. And so if you pushed everything towards street maintenance, yes, your flexibility to tackle other kinds of issues is reduced. So with that, let's get to the next slide, because I think I just already told you the answer here. But yes. So, and again, this is a planning tool. So we just took the previous slide, and we took that 5 million and kind of spread it out over all years. And you can see that if we put that into the maintenance, yes, we're getting to a level of about 2.7 million, certainly in the first few years. But even then, again, as you get into years 3 and 4 and the out years, it starts to taper off because it's not enough to sustain it. And so even though it's one-time money and certainly makes a big impact on street maintenance, and if you remember, this is a lot closer to the target that we were talking about here on May 24th. But even then, that was 3.85 million. If we tried to maintain a pavement quality index that's closer into the typical standard of 70 to 75, 2.7 is a lot closer than probably the largest expenditure we would ever have in street maintenance would be 2.7. Now, again, in the very lower corner there at the bottom, it shows you the fund balance again, 216,000. So we would spend it all and would be nothing left. Our flexibility would be reduced significantly.
To be clear,
Yes.
2.7 is the most we would ever spend to get to the 75%?
Historically, that would be the most we've ever spent. So, excuse me.
The most we have ever spent, or the most we would ever spend?
The most we have ever spent to date, if we were to spend that amount. And perhaps back to the question Peggy Cole was asking about kind of could we actually manage that level? Well, quite honestly, I'm setting us up so we could. I've actually I'm in the process of hiring an engineering firm who specifically specializes in pavement preservation strategies. So whatever the number is that council picks, we're going to go down that path that I shared with you back on May 24th, and even prior to that. More than just overlay, we got to come up with something we can afford. And so, this is a way for you to kind of see what could be possible. And again, many ways to do this. And maybe we start to get into the summary and some of the conclusions or recommendations that staff has that we certainly could target next year with a high level of maintenance, but then you may want to pull back and actually have early part of next year a bigger strategy about funding capital in the longer term, including some of the other alternatives that we talked in the past, including sales tax.
Okay, we'll just move on, and this slide shows the ending fund balances for the general fund and the capital projects fund if both of those alternatives were incorporated. If we drew down general fund cash balance, fund balance, it would start off at over $9 million, be drawn down to just under $7 million, would leave us with about a 10% reserve. And then the capital projects fund would be drawn down from the $9 million down to about $2 million. So you can see we do have that least reserve there, and that would be the bare minimum for the capital projects fund.
Okay, we've got a couple of summary and then maybe talk a little bit about a staff recommendation. So again, taking these strategies, the existing fund balance is really needed to fund street maintenance at the existing levels over the next 5 years. So if street maintenance was a priority, you would have to use the $9 million in the fund balance of the capital project fund in order to maintain the current level. That doesn't add any kind of congestion projects. You'd be using just over the 5 years that fund balance. If the council decided they wanted to look at some level of modification to the reserve policy in the general fund, sure, that could add more one-time revenues to things like street maintenance. And as we've already discussed, if you took that to its fullest extent and just made that dedication, obviously it reduces your flexibility for other kinds of purposes. Even if we take both of those alternatives and we play them out to the fullest extent, after the 5 years, quite honestly, we're going to have the same problem. We're going to have insufficient revenue in the capital funds, in the capital project fund specifically, to maintain the existing prioritized infrastructure or prioritized capital needs for vehicles, for computers, and we're going to struggle after 5 years.
Just looking at this in summary, we have identified the total project costs over the next 5 years, which is the $68 million. And if we incorporated both of those alternatives, about 55.7% or 56% would be funded. You can also see the amount of deferred projects, and the largest one is the streets, sidewalks, and traffic signals. 41% would be funded over the next 5 years, but that would still leave $21 million that would be unfunded. So there's still a large need in street maintenance projects even after the 5 years.
You might want to actually include in that, or at least make note of it, any public infrastructure required for development, to support development that's not yet developed.
Okay, yeah, good point. And I think we had one more slide here. What we would like to do is every year provide this 5-year fiscally constrained capital plan to council, and through this, during the annual budget process, we will also show the deferred amounts, the deferred project amounts, so council can actually know exactly what amount is being deferred, because I think in the past those costs were not easily identified. And we can also use that to prioritize the projects a little bit better. And we will also work on that evaluation process so we can refine that every year and better identify the projects that have more immediate need.
Let's see, may I? Let's go to that.
Yep.
So if street maintenance is a priority, and again, that's a piece of direction we're looking for from council here tonight, is if that really is a priority for you, then in 2017, we would suggest that you pick a target. 2.7 is just something that, we looked at as one of the alternatives. Could be something different, could be higher, could be lower, at least for 2017. Then we'd have to use the capital project fund to kind of support that priority, and that's only for 1 year. Then the future reserve of the general fund policy with the city council would probably be a future discussion that the council could take on later. We do not have to do that now. That is something that, as some of the council member points out, that's a pretty significant policy decision, but you do not need to make that now. And then as Doug touched on at the very beginning, we're recommending that you kind of reassess your financial options in the early part of next year. And specifically when you got a new city manager on board, you can bring that person in, and there's just a lot of work that's necessary in order to kind of look at, more significant issues such as sales tax, even though there may be some support for that in some of our recent polling citizen survey. I think there's just a significant community discussion about such an item. And so we're just not in a position this year right now to take that one on, in my opinion.
I have a question, observation.
Yes.
Maybe you can respond to. So last night I was at a meeting of some citizens that didn't have anything to do with city stuff, but somehow or other the issue of a possible sales tax came up. And these people obviously were not interested in paying more sales tax. And I said something about people shopping outside the city so they can save a few cents, a few dollars, whatever. And the impact of that when bunches and bunches of people do that, because we rely on the sales tax revenue to provide things that I knew these people really like about Littleton. These were not mean-spirited people at all. They were totally surprised, about that, because it just isn't something they think about. So it seems to me, there might be a possible way to do a little more educating of people to say, well, yeah, if you save this much, right, each week driving wherever you drive outside the city to buy something so you save some sales tax or whatever, and then you multiply that times some kind of figure so they'd understand that combined impact on providing the quality that they're wanting here. And these people were not hostile when I explained that. They just wasn't in their thinking.
Well, I think you're touching on what I think most of us would just really call a more broader community discussion. So there is a lot of education. There's a lot of different ways you could approach such an issue. And I've been part of many similar discussions. There's always concerns about, if it's too high, people might do something, they might leave and purchase things outside of the community. That's always going to be part of the discussion. So you have to be real sensitive to whatever the level is. But again, this is a very complicated issue. There's lots of pros and cons behind it. I think it's certainly a discussion this community should be having at some point. And I think what we're trying to demonstrate as staff to the council is that our resources are going to be limited. After 5 years, if we took all those to the fullest extent, we are going to have significant challenges in funding any capital
Yeah, and I think I didn't state what I was trying to state clearly based on your response. I'm thinking that we might help people right now understand the value of shopping here now, even if we didn't raise something. Now, raising it is another issue, but just so people can understand. I mean, we've had this discussion here, I don't know how many times in the last almost 8 years, over 8 years, and before
I see.
that.
Yeah.
But we're not trying to gouge people, but people tell us they love what's in Littleton. They don't understand, and they say, well,
understand the point, yeah.
Why do you pay Mark so much money? Why do you pay Doug so much money? Well, and I say to them,
Look at
if
the
we didn't
PowerPoint.
pay them so much money, then we wouldn't have the kind of staff that we really need to work on these problems.
I think we'll definitely be moving into a discussion beyond this meeting regarding additional funding sources, and I think sales tax has to be a consideration of that. And the reality is, most of the sales tax paid in Littleton is not paid by Littletonites. It's paid by people that come in and do the shopping. So
Yep.
it's not, and it's a viable option, and we're getting good comments. But tonight, I think keeping a focus on what you guys are kind of asking us is the 2.7 million using the current capital fund reserve to support this project. And is this then something that, after some additional discussion, you want us to bless, you'll bring it back in the budget?
Yes, specifically, yeah, that's one of the big questions. We would suggest that be a target. Obviously, the department directors have to go back through the entire budget process. We have to look at the operating, because whatever decisions we make on the capital is going to influence what's available in the operating. So we may have to come back to you and say, based on our review of the operating budget, we may have to tweak that target. We may not be able to meet it exactly. In fact, I know we're going to have quite a significant challenge
We're gonna have a
already.
challenge.
I think we are. But if that is a desire of council, is to raise the level of street maintenance at least for 1 year, that's a piece of information we'd like to know.
And part of that part of the conversation, I think, is how comfortable are we with reducing fund balances that much? I'm not at all comfortable with taking them down to what I would consider dangerous levels. We need to pay attention to other sources too. We have, within 18 months, we'll have 460 odd hotel rooms of high quality in this market, and they're going to generate, just those 4 buildings will generate some $15 to $20 million in room revenues a year. That's money that is spent by people who do not live in Littleton. Those are guests from outside the community, and some of them may be guests of us, but fish and company gets stale after 3 days. If just a 3% tax on that is over $500,000 a year, that we could, it's worth thinking about how to, maybe that's something that we could set up as a fund. Lodging taxes are usually used to promote a community, but we could certainly parse that in ways that promote the community. But for that 5-year period, we could bond a significant amount of the infrastructure costs that we're looking on roads, and come back at the end of that and restructure it so that it continues to go. Denver's lodging tax is over 10%. We've done studies in my professional life about lodging taxes, and they don't become problematic in losing demand until they get to the 15 to 20% area. So certainly a 3% would not be significant. Douglas County doesn't have a lodging tax, but if you're choosing between the hotels at Hampton or not Hampton, at County Line and C470, your option is to go into Highlands Ranch to the Home 2 or the Hilton Garden Inn, and you're looking at $3 or $4 difference in price. Are you really going to do that for $3 or $4 a day? So that's something we need to look at, and maybe we have a one-year approach to this and a serious discussion about how we can fund this from something which doesn't cause pain to our own citizens. And this is it's a widely used mechanism. It's certainly worth looking at. So the bonding mechanism would go with that. So I think those numbers start to make some sense when you look at it. And that obviously has leveraging power that could get us a lot of those roads fixed a lot more quickly without drawing down these fund balances.
Two questions. Go back to page 10, Doug. Looking at this page, in 2017, vehicle apparatus is $2 million above any other year that's indicated there. And I know about the lease payments, and we've discussed that. I know there's also policies around vehicle replacements and the like, but that seems to be a pretty steep bump.
I think it's a new ladder truck.
Yes, it is a ladder truck. And again, this is a replacement of a ladder truck. But yes, I think it's $1.4 million for that one to be replaced next year.
Okay.
So that is a large.
That's also amongst the partners.
That one would be split amongst the partners. So here we're showing the gross costs and not the fire partner share coming back to the city.
Okay.
But that's the large one for next year that really stands out.
Well, there was a thought of how that might possibly be reviewed in taking a look at least 2017 and taking a look at that. Second is there's at least potential rumblings of Congress dealing with Main Street fairness before the end of this year. Between that and what the state has negotiated with regard to the Amazon tax, or at least enforcement of the tax that should be there, what's the potential, at least dollar amounts coming from what is currently leakage on those, and how might that impact 2017 and the outlying years?
Well, unfortunately, I've heard rumblings, every so often, and I don't know. I mean, Mike really has a good ear to those type of things too.
He wasn't under the interrogation light at the moment.
The big one would be the Marketplace Fairness Act, obviously, with the internet sales, and I think our preliminary estimates based off the state's data would be $3 to $4 million. So it's a large amount of money to the city, definitely. As far as Amazon, I will tell you that we're pursuing every avenue potentially to create nexus here in the city so we could possibly collect sales tax from Amazon, which would be a large contributor. And I don't know, I don't really have any good estimates on that. I think the city of Lakewood has garnered some Amazon nexus, which creates some sales taxes for them, and we're pursuing every avenue that we can to do the same here in the city. Right now, I think it's really up to Amazon to comply.
Sure.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
A number of other cities also have Amazon facilities or subsidiary facilities located within that. Like Aurora just got the call center and a few other things. And so Aurora's got nexus. So if we can somehow establish that here as well.
Again, if I may, use the internet sales taxes plus the lodging tax as a couple of examples why I believe the fiscally constrained plan needs to be looked at every year.
Yep.
And so that you do look at these other financial options. And so this is obviously playing out two of our existing options, but you may have others that you want to pursue. You need to put that into the model and look at it every year. So you may feel comfortable maybe having just 1 year of increased street maintenance, but then after that, you may have to say, we're going to have to reassess and not commit to anything beyond that. That's another alternative, I suppose.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to suggest as well. Just that we can reassess, move forward with what we've proposed using those two funds this year, reassess next year, and that way
You're going to do some creative financing.
doesn't buy it down.
Look at things. But I also think this is a good plan, and I would love to start seeing some repairs being done, particularly in some of the parts that are, some of the city streets that are really, really devastated. And I think that in and of itself will help build the community's level of confidence and their support for continuing this project. Because continuing it past 2017 with the way you guys have designed it is just not something that's I'm very comfortable with at all, like Phil said. Council, are we all right with staff's recommendation on this and having them come back to us budget based on what they've got here? Phil?
I want to see, in addition to this, recognizing it's a step in a direction, I don't want to preclude our other options on congestion relief and want to see those included in the plans, whether it impacts the budget or not, that we're indeed making progress in parallel, because we're going through stationary master plans. We've already gone through at least preliminary thoughts on Broadway and Mineral and Santa Fe, and want to see us not preclude possibilities heading by going in this direction. And those are very important, because if all we do is we don't address that, we're missing one of the big issues from our citizens.
I agree and would love to.
Another piece of it that I'd really like to see you come forward with is that we've gotten into a state where we have a lot of deferred maintenance on the roads, and we need to catch that up. But a long-term plan should also include a part about how we avoid getting to a deferred state in the long run the next time through. So if we have the ability to chunk fix this and get caught up, what's our plan so that we don't fall off the edge again and get into this situation? Because I don't think some council in 20 years, kids who are currently in high school, whatever, or in our case, their 50s, are already, trying to figure out how to solve that problem. We don't want to have them looking at drawing down funds either. We need to fix the short term, and we need to make a plan for the long term.
I want to leave the mess for someone else.
Yeah, it's a long-term responsibility here.
And I'd also like to make sure by committing to a 1 year at this point in time, recognizing we can't abandon it in the longer term, but that whatever 1 year contracting we may doing is not putting us in a terrifically inefficient position as well. As much as I want on the other side, I don't want us to be inefficient in that and be paying terrific premiums.
Appreciate that point.
Just a point of clarification, Mayor. It sounded like some council had angst over using general fund for that extra $1 million. So would the capital fund balance be an adequate resource for that extra $1 million? I just want to make sure I heard
I'd like to hear
that
some
message.
alternatives on what we're giving up.
Okay. So you would like to see that as a policy question? Okay.
Okay? Got what you need?
I think
So what
so.
we need.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council, do you need a break?
Nope.
Keep going. Discussion of council standards of conduct and protocols regarding email use. I'm not sure much discussion we need. We do have standards, we do have protocols, we also have charter that indicates stay out of administrative business, which would include emails to staff. So unless there's some other concern that we needed to address on this, I would suggest that our protocols are covered. Council member behaves badly, apologizes profusely, and can we move on? I mean, I think at some point, we've got bigger work to do. We just sat here and listened to a presentation that, if that isn't something we need to spend some more time on. So I would just ask council, is there a need to have a discussion on this? Do we have clarity and understanding? Are we ready to move on?
I think the whole point it was brought up is because of this thing we just went through with emails. And that's why it was brought up, obviously. So it's just, it's a reminder to folks that there's a reason why those respect others, even if you disagree with them. It is the decision. Just as a former or past councils, they've made decisions we don't agree with, but we don't go around beating up on former council members for decisions they made. Just like I'm not going to ever beat up on, council members, past council members. I'm just not going to do that myself. But I think we as current council members with each other, we have disagreements. When we went through the urban renewal thing, it was a very heated moment also. But I think we were able to keep it within reason within our council. So that's why this was obviously brought up. And I presume that Bruce put it on here.
That's
Put it
correct.
on last week.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Let's move on.
We have discussion with Mark Ruff for acting city manager role. This was requested at the last regular meeting. Mark has indicated he is interested in the acting city manager role. Council needs to appoint someone to that position while we conduct a national search for a permanent city manager. And we requested that Mark come back to the study session so that we could chat with him. A number of council members had some questions and wanted to just have some conversation. So I would suggest this will just be kind of a loose conversation. I'd like to kind of have council go around, if you have a question and a follow-up, and then move on to the next council member and just kind of keep circulating around until we run out of questions or until Mark runs out of here screaming. But go ahead, Bill, do you want to start?
Sure. Mark, have you ever served in a city manager's role at all?
I've been interim city manager in the last two cities, just filling in for, say, a week or two. So I will tell you, in my career, I've actually pursued being a city manager permanently, so to speak. And so I've applied actually probably 15 years ago, 2 different cities, came runner-up twice. I think after kind of reflecting on what I went through, I just decided, I'm probably better at public works, to be honest with you, than being a city manager. Personally, I think I'd probably be pretty good at it. I think in this particular instance, and based on where I'm at in my professional life and my career, I'm really not interested in being a permanent city manager. In this particular case, I'd be more than happy, I'd be honored to kind of serve as an interim, but I'm not interested in the permanent position here. I also believe that if that was the case, I think, quite honestly, that'd be to the council's advantage is in their recruitment, because I can assure you that as city managers kind of look at a particular city, one of the first questions they will ask is whether or not there's somebody internal who has applied. Now, that could change, obviously, but if there isn't anybody, and certainly I would not be, quite honestly, I think you're going to get more interest.
I've heard you at many presentations that you've given us, that you've given to the other public situations. I think the part that encourages me to be our temporary, and I thank you for stepping up the plate, is that our Public Works Department is huge, and it's going to require a lot of attention. And to bring in somebody for 6 months who's unfamiliar with that, even though they have general experience, I like the idea that you know it. I think you have a great supporting staff. I think Mike is an excellent supporter that is there to help you. And I think then as we do hire a new city manager, I like the idea that you don't want to challenge it, at least at this point, but that new person is going to have a very strong staff.
Well, I believe that. I think certainly, Mike and I have had some conversation about this on how we would kind of manage the responsibility, because quite honestly, I'm going to have to stay involved in public works to some extent. There's just too many things going on where I cannot separate myself from that. And so we do have, in my view, and I shared a little of this the last time, I do have kind of 2 big pieces as I view it, kind of the existing field operations. Yes, there's some work to be done there, but there's a lot of experience. Those guys know what to do. And the engineering side is the one I got to pay closer attention to, because as I've shared with you,
Thank you.
I have recruited now 3 separate times for a city engineer, and I cannot hire one. And so we're taking some other steps here to try one more time, but I've put some pieces in place to contract for somebody as a city engineer. And I've got contracts in other places too. So I believe I have that kind of set up so that we can succeed. Plus, we're going to finish the fire station here in the next couple of weeks. I got to be honest, there is a ton of work related to kind of managing that particular project. I had to do it because there wasn't anybody. If I had a city engineer, I certainly would have given it to that person. But the timing, quite honestly, in my opinion, is probably good for me to step into that role. So will it be hard? Yes, it will be hard. I have to tell you, though, I don't view this as the hardest task I've ever taken on in my career. In fact, not in the least. I see this particular assignment here as certainly very difficult, but what's different about it is that collectively, you as the council and myself, we are working through collaboration, communication, and we have a goal all to succeed. We all want to succeed. We all want to keep the operation moving. We want to see the community prosper to succeed. I've been in assignments where people were actively pursuing for us to fail, for me personally to fail, for the organization to fail. And I've worked through that kind of a scenario for years in particular projects. So that's pressure, and that's difficult. So I see this particular piece here that you're asking me, yes, again, be difficult, but it'd be at a different level, and I quite honestly would rather enjoy it.
Thank you.
Bill's question, you said that you are not interested in.
Well, I just think based on where I'm at in my career, I think that I'm just much more proficient at public works. Quite honestly, that's really where my heart's at anyways. I think I do love the interaction, quite honestly, at the policy level with council, with the community. So I think that's why I was interested at one point in being a city manager. But I have taken on some pretty unique capital projects in public works, and I've had some great success with that. And, when I first came here, I think, in fact, I even shared perhaps with you that I'm not interested in the status quo, managing the status quo. I want to take on a big challenge. And so I think it was explained to me rather clearly what I was stepping into. There's a lot of great work that's occurred here, but quite honestly, there's also a lot of people who are going to be retiring. There's a real focus here of trying to collect the information that's collectively in a lot of people's heads within public works and kind of put that into systems so that other people over time can step into that and succeed. I do think that we have a lot of funding challenges. I've been through those before. They're hard. I've been through a lot of public and community discussion about tax increases or bond measures. If I may just share one story, I think that I kind of look at is extremely unique and probably an example where I believe I've learned a lot, and I think I've probably exceeded there at a level that probably most people perhaps would not, to be quite honestly. When I was hired by the city of Shoreline, one of the reasons I was hired is because of my expertise in utilities. And I was asked to negotiate a purchase of the water system from the city of Seattle. So it would be like us going to the Denver Water and saying, we are tired and we do not like your service and we want to buy you out. Now you can imagine what Denver Water's reaction to that would be. Well, the city of Seattle was the same way. They had no interest in selling that. I worked on that issue for 5 years, and I negotiated an acquisition of $25 million for that. Then I had to go and actually create a water utility from scratch. We had nothing, no utility billing, no buildings, no equipment, no manpower. And so I had to actually assemble a study that would show us and all the resources necessary to create not only the infrastructure here to support and maintain that, but then I actually had to design the system to separate the city of Shoreline from the city of Seattle. So we had a purchase price of $25 million, and then we had a complete separation cost and improvements of $30 million. And we had to take that through a public process of over 1 year, and that's the pressure that I felt, where I had a water utility in the city of Shoreline neighboring us who was actively campaigning for our failure, because they were afraid if we succeeded that we would assume them next. So then, after a long one-year public process, it went to a vote. The voters had to approve the purchase price and the $30 million necessary to separate that system. And the citizens approved that in the middle of the recession by over 60%. And so I'm telling you that, based on my experience, that was by far the most difficult thing I have ever taken on. And I think perhaps one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. Because of quite honestly, it was the public process. If it wasn't for that, the city was in a position, no way to convince the citizens, from the dais that somehow this was going to be a good idea. This had to come from the community. And so, I think quite honestly, that's my expertise. That's why I like public works. That's quite honestly why I want to stay in public works permanently.
Yes. Mark, thanks for being willing to at least have the conversation anyway. So, both coming into the position here in Littleton, and it sounds like in prior positions, you've dealt with organizational change. Talk about how you deal with the challenges. What do you see as possibly additional complications, and what do you see in an interim role? Could be as long as a year, I suppose, because that's what we have by charter. In being able to address those not just within Public Works, but all the departments and associations and partners that Littleton has.
I think that's a great question. I think that's really the heart of what I would hope we'd talk about. I've been through this before. I've seen, quite honestly, several transitions through city managers in my career. Some have gone very well, quite honestly, some have not. In my view, I've observed probably a few lessons out of that I believe kind of help those organizations kind of take the next step. And I'm just going to be honest with you, it's going to be very difficult for the next several months. I think the council themselves, they're going to have to, you collectively are going to have to find some ways to communicate among yourselves in order to get the business done. There are some things I can help you with, but there's a lot of things, quite honestly, that's a relationship issue you folks will have to take on. I cannot solve. I'm also rather straightforward. I'm going to tell you what I believe, and if you don't agree with that, I'm not offended. I think there's a lot more to be had about kind of conversation about kind of the relationship during the interim period than there ever will be, perhaps months after that. I think this is a critical time for the council themselves to kind of collectively decide what's the important task they want to work on here in the next year, the next several months, in the interim. In fact, Mike has sent out to the council here, and then this is a follow-up that's actually been on, I think, your agenda here for quite some time, where Michael actually asked you for your priorities here. Well, honestly, that's one of the techniques that I have seen that has been very valuable in helping a council and an organization kind of manage the change, is you need to decide what you believe are the priorities here during this interim period for the next year. What I've seen successful then is for the interim city manager and the rest of the department directors to take that list and create a work plan. We will take that and tell you what our capacity is. What is it we think we have the resources to actually manage over what time? Then my suggestion would be is that I would bring that back to you, and then you guys would have to approve that work plan. That would be the focus. That's where we would spend our time. And I think the other thing that's also important, kind of managing this issue here for the next several months, and I think actually Mike has started this, where there is a council log of the requests that each council kind of brings. Many times it's initiated by the citizens. I think that's a great way for us to kind of capture whatever the history has been. There's several things that I do not know that Michael Penny was working on for you. We need to kind of collect that history again. But honestly, I would put that into the log. I've had great success with city managers doing that. I think it's a great way to share with all the council kind of what the individual requests are. It's also a great way as staff to take that and really assess what our capacity is to respond to that. And I'm going to tell you, quite honestly, and rather straightforward, what I think we can do and what we can't do. I think I also would like the log as a contrast against the work plan. And so if there are things in the work plan you want us to do, that's the priority, great. As we kind of look at the log and there's some other things that you want us to perhaps tackle, I will relate that back to what I think the organization has the capacity to handle. And then if you want to change that work plan, that's fine.
In change orders?
Change orders. That change order is okay.
Let me follow it on with a
We're going to keep going.
with
You
a
can do one follow-on.
question on this because it to some extent deals with the communication you're talking about. One is it's within our protocols, and then some aspects of this are also within our charter, that the council not be involved in operations, and at least individually, and also an evenness of information.
Absolutely.
And would like to hear how you would manage those as an interim.
You know, every city I've ever been in has always had that as a protocol, that the council stay in the policy and we implement the policy. However, I think there's obviously some collaboration that needs to occur. And one of the things, quite honestly, I would suggest is that myself and Mike and the city attorney meet with the mayor pro tem, once a week to review the agenda. I think during the interim period, I think there's actually a lot of merit for us to review the agenda. And this is not just the next meeting, this is several meetings, several months. And when you look at the work plan and you contrast the meetings, that's where we're going to decide when do we take that on? Where's the capacity that we have to kind of meet that schedule? So there's kind of the two-way communication. In my opinion, those agendas, that calendar, that's yours. It's not the city manager, it's not mine. I know that your protocols say the city manager sets the agenda, but that really is your opportunity to do the city's business. It's mine to tell you what I think we have is the capacity and the timing to do it, and we have to mutually agree to it. But I think there needs to be more conversation about your calendar and when we do things.
How do you do that, recognizing you just mentioned a select group, recognizing there's a requirement for an evenness of communication across all of council?
You know, I think we have to share that. You know, every week I'd have to kind of summarize, this is what we've discussed, this is what we've concluded. I've also seen where protocols where, you know, council can decide two or more if they want to add an item to the agenda and they want to somehow change that or at least raise the opportunity of changing the agenda. Certainly they can do that. I do think I think the log is a good way to kind of share some of that. Whatever a council member asks the city manager a question or even a department director, my experience is that when an answer is given back, they all get it, all council members. And I think I would err on the side of sharing more information rather than less. In fact, there's lots of things that I would like to summarize and kind of pass on to all of you. And then at some point you may say that's a little too much, that's fine. But I think what I've learned in some of these, you know, changing environments when you have kind of this event going on, you do need to share more information.
Well, most of my questions been answered. So, what question should we be asking that you think we won't? I don't know if I said that right, but anyway,
Well, you know, I also think, you know, again, I've seen councils, how they function as a team, and I realize right at the moment here that might be a little difficult, but I think that you're going to have to find ways. You'll have to find ways to kind of, you know, work among yourselves to function more as a team. I think by doing so, then I think there's much more opportunity for us to communicate and collaborate. I think the more that is more of an issue, I think the more difficult an interim will have in trying to kind of push things forward. Because ultimately, you need to make the policy decisions to set the direction. And so I think that's why, to me, it's really important for you to tell me what your priorities are in the next year, to develop a work plan for which you all agree to.
Let me circle back around to Public Works. During this interim period, Mark, if you're asked to step into this, and I reiterate what other people have said. Thanks for walking up to the noose.
Sure.
But what would it require any reshuffling within your department over the short term, or would you have to? Do you anticipate having to hire a temporary person to help out in that situation, or tell us what it would look like from within Public Works?
Well, specifically, I'd be asking the fleet manager to step up and be the operations director in effect here for the field operations. So I've already had some discussion with my staff about what that would mean. So in essence, street maintenance, grounds maintenance, fleet, of course, would all kind of fall within the operations director. Also facilities kind of fills in there. And so that's, in my view, that's kind of a lot of the field operation. The engineering piece is the development review, obviously a lot of the capital construction. Those are the pieces that I have, again, contracts for. So the only piece that really I need to do that's different is to ask the fleet manager to step up and actually be at a higher level to function here as kind of this operations director.
And as a follow-up to that, if you're in the city manager's role for a period of time, what other departments within the city do you have experience? Tell us about your experience with police, fire, community development, finance, the other areas. Is that something that you'd be stepping into that you have any background in, or is it as a supervisory piece that you'd be doing that strictly?
Great question. I think obviously I have a fair amount of experience in community development and just kind of the typical functions that take place there. I was even in my early career, I was a community development director for the city of Delta. So that was way back long ago. But
I've been to Delta, you weren't very busy.
Well, and another reason why I moved over to Public Works, I got to be honest a bit. Yeah, so certainly kind of the planning functions. I have a fair amount of experience. I actually do believe I'm pretty proficient at budgeting and accounting. I think again, my experience in utilities is really deep. I think they are kind of a unique kind of a budgeting function. And again, one of the reasons why the city of Shoreline even hired me was because of that experience. So, a lot of that comes pretty easy to me. Police and fire, certainly I've had, kind of operational exchanges with them over time. Certainly with the city of Grand Junction, pretty deep relationship with really both of them, specifically the police department, traffic operations, traffic enforcement, so at that level, certainly pretty deep. I've even, started some of the initial design work there for the police facility that's currently now in Grand Junction. So I've certainly been exposed to a lot of their operations. I've built fire stations before, so the one we're building now is not my first. So again, that's more on the operational side, more of the capital. Museums and libraries, not much experience. To be honest, built a museum.
Do you use libraries and museums?
I think more so when I had kids, Peggy, not so much anymore. My kids are gone.
Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
So given some of the legal issues we have coming before the city, or that we're involved with right now, and some of them, at least one I can think of, involve the Public Works Department to some degree. So in my opinion, it seems helpful that we have someone like yourself who doesn't have to go through a learning curve over the next 6 months or whatever it may be, that, working with our legal department. But before you learn the secret handshake, what are your thoughts on all this?
As far as kind of working with the legal department?
And some of these issues that are legal issues coming up?
Well, let's see. I have a long history working with the city attorney's office. When I was with the city of Grand Junction, almost half of the entire operation and capital came out of Public Works and Utilities. And so my relationship with the city attorney's office was long and deep. We had our own water resources, so water law. complicated in this state, very familiar with it. In fact, at the time, there was a consortium of cities and a Denver Water District who was kind of fighting the Department of the Interior here over the Colorado Compact and the lower basin states. In fact, Jim Lockhead, who is now the current director of Denver Water, was the special attorney that the city of Grand Junction and this consortium hired. So I worked with Jim Lockhead on water issues. Not surprised, he's now the director of Denver Water. So, and certainly my work with the city of Shoreline was really deep with the city attorney's office. So from a legal perspective, yeah, I feel very comfortable. I'm kind of certainly very, find it easy to kind of read through case law if I have to. And, the state laws in Washington are very different from the state of Colorado, so I had a big learning curve. Quite honestly, I had to read a lot of state law, got to catch up. So, certainly we have lots of issues going on here. That's part of the second part of your question, I suppose. I don't see anything there that I haven't seen before, to be honest with you. Yes, they're unique. They're all unique. But certainly would be comfortable kind of jumping into that if I had to.
This gets back to how you might be viewed somewhat internally and then being able to relate to council as a possibility on this. Yes. One is you said you'd need to stay involved in public works to some degree. Mm-hmm. And yet the capital fund is for the most part the kind of the purview of public works. And the transfer from the general fund means anything that isn't spent elsewhere then moves to that purview of the capital fund and public works. We're entering a budget discussion. How can you be in a position to advocate for everyone else as well as public works in all of this and be viewed internally as unbiased? As well as externally unbiased across all services, recognizing there's some tough items, particularly the associations have been a bit bruised in this, and at least my awareness of what's happening in other municipalities across Colorado and across the nation is this is a particularly tough year for those discussions. So.
Actually, I think that's one of the core questions that you would ever ask anybody who's internal, whether or not they're going to be able to step up and be the interim to be effective, not only as in the relationship with you, but internal. And not only during the interim period, but when it's done and step back as another department director. To be honest, I think that's one of my strengths. I think I truly look at issues pretty objectively. And certainly I would advocate for public works, but I would advocate for any department who had the argument that really was the core of what the council's after. So I don't have any problem personally, facilitating a discussion during the budget process. And again, quite honestly, I think this is one of my strengths. I think that's one of my skill sets, my interpersonal skills, is to really facilitate a discussion just like that. So we'll get all these issues out on the table. I'll certainly communicate what I think is important with public works, but I'm confident, and I know these department directors good enough in the 15 months I've been here, they'll advocate for theirs. But in the end, it really is a collective decision that we need to make. I may have to step in and say, this is what I truly think needs to happen, but I would bet after we're done with this process, it'll be a collective decision that this is what we recommend to the council.
Peggy?
Since I've been on council, we've had a couple of different types of budget proposals. And at CML and some other places, I've attended sessions on some quite varied budget processes. So I'm wondering about what kind you like. Just as an example, I think it's called zero-based budgeting. Then there's approach. And there's some others that I can't remember names of. Do you favor one, find one more beneficial?
I absolutely favor one. If I was asked to, truly pursue something, and I know I'm not, but performance-based budgeting is, to me, is the most effective. True performance-based budgeting. Lots of organizations will talk about how we kind of do that, but my experience is that very few actually perform this well. And so, I think quite honestly, if I was going to make a recommendation to the city council about what they should be looking for in a future city manager, a lot of it starts with strategic planning. But honestly, I think we have lots of work to do on strategic planning, true strategic planning. Take your council goals as an example. When I first got here, and I realize there's been some discussion about this, but on the wall I see a series of goals, a series of objectives. There's no action steps. There's nothing there that tells me this is exactly what staff is to do. And even if you have those action steps, there's no connection to the budget. And so, in my view, if you truly work to perfect performance-based budgeting, you do the strategic planning, you set the goals, you set the objectives, you set the action steps. We collectively agree this is what we shall do over this period of time, and we're going to put the resource to it. And so your budget is tied to that. Quite honestly, what I see in our process today is that there's a reference to it where we kind of, as staff, say, well, this kind of addresses your goal. I think that's insufficient. I think that kind of connection is weak. Now, I have to be honest, during this interim period, I think we need to maintain the status quo. I think the approach that we've taken here with kind of a policy question, I think we need to maintain that. And whoever your new city manager is, whatever your goals are with him or her, then you have those discussions. And I'm confident that the budget will somehow change to reflect that direction. But I don't think it's necessarily wise to pursue that right now. I think it's, as the interim, my biggest part of my challenge is trying to make sure that I provide the rest of the department directors with enough resources for them to pursue what the council has set as the direction. If they have a problem with that, I need to hear that. But in the interim, I need to make sure we keep moving in that direction. Then obviously I need to hear back from you what are those priorities, just to make sure we're in alignment. Right now, I think the budget, quite honestly, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for collectively you to work as a team to kind of set a direction in the budget, and for us as the staff to take that and to implement into the policy, into the action steps, so to speak. But honestly, I think whoever your city manager is in the future is going to appreciate that. It'll be good timing.
So in this year, because we're closing in fast on this whole process, I think I already said a few meetings ago that I'd like to see a proposed budget that is not sort of finding any kind of little piece of a goal or objective to hang something on so that they call it what we said, but I find it hard to really see the connection. So might you in some way be able to get us moving in the direction you just said?
If that was a real goal of the council for us to pursue that in the budget, well then sure, we would have that discussion. We'd try to make some improvement there. This particular topic is very broad, very complicated, and I think there's lots to be gained if you do this well. And so I think I'd be a little reluctant to kind of step in and do little things without having the bigger discussion about where you truly want to take some of your goals, your objectives. Because I think you need to have that.
I might not have said clearly then what I'm trying to get at. So I think council's goals and objectives have some clarity to them. Maybe they could be clearer, but I think they have some clarity. But if we said we'd like to have dancing pandas at various events and we wind up with mice, I think we didn't hit the target at all. So I don't know if that helps.
It does, and I've looked at those objectives, and quite honestly, some of them are really kind of an action step. some of them are a little too vague for us, at least for me anyways, to understand what is it you truly intended with that.
Okay.
Could I make progress with that? Could we as staff, somehow make a better connection between the current goals and objectives and the budget? Well, sure, we could. I just want to make sure the expectations are somewhat reasonable about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Bill?
One thing in an interim position is the organization needs to stabilize a little bit after losing a leader and be in position to accept a new leader when that person comes along. How would you go about identifying strengths and weaknesses of the organization that you see from within that might help us select a city manager?
Well, first of all, again, it starts, in my opinion, with whatever your goals are. I think separate from that, what my experience has been, and certainly what I've applied within, certainly public works and utilities as part of my entire career, there needs to be kind of a regular personal connection with each of the departments. What I see currently that happens in a lot of our director meetings is that we tend to focus on the council agenda. That's important. But I think the real need right now is for us to focus on whatever the goals and the objectives, your action plan, your work plan. That's where the conversation needs to focus. I think that's where the relationship between myself and the rest of the departments, where I can learn a lot more and understand what is it they're truly being challenged with. And so I think that's where I get to hear it. It's not when we meet on a regular basis and talk about the agenda. But honestly, there's little conversation that really takes place in that setting to understand really what goes on in the other departments.
Good. Everybody good? Bill?
No. In taking a look at possibly taking this on, what do you need from council in this, recognizing there's the potential for rollback with essentially no penalty in this? And related to that is what less than a unanimous support from council would say this is something you should take on?
Well, I think, quite honestly, what I would want from council is for you to be rather frank with me. I think that's the only way that I'm going to get enough feedback from you. I need to meet with you individually at some interval, at least once a month, kind of a one-on-one, where I get a little more feedback about that. I also think that what I also need is that if we were to meet with, say, the mayor and mayor pro tem, as I suggested, we need to debrief the council meetings. I need to hear from at least those two about what worked well and what didn't. And so that we can kind of fine tune whatever approach we need as we kind of move forward. I think it's just a level of communication and really truly collaboration. We have to kind of work together to try to figure out what is truly the approach that's going to fit us here in order to move forward during this time. My approach, I think my skill set, quite honestly, is to kind of meet with people really face to face as often as I can. Quite honestly, email, I don't necessarily find that real effective. Yes, you can share with me, whatever the issues are that you kind of want to put on the table, but ultimately I need to kind of talk with people. That's my preference, is to kind of work through and talk through some of these issues. Quite honestly, I'm going to suggest that we put a lot more on the study sessions. In fact, working with Mike here in the last couple of weeks, there's already a couple of issues out there that I think is kind of merit a little more discussion. Certainly the development activity is an opportunity for us to collectively decide and discuss some of the issues I know that we wrestle with in the community. So to me, that's underutilized, and it's another opportunity for us to kind of help manage some of the change that's going to be occurring here in the next year.
Anything less than unanimous?
Well, I suppose, but I think if there was anybody who was truly, kind of dead set against me being it, honestly, I'm not offended. I would support whatever the council wants to do. If you wanted to take a different approach, I'm okay with that. I really feel vested in this organization. I took this job looking at it as my last. So I want this organization to succeed. I want you to succeed. I don't want to go anywhere else. So if it's not unanimous, I'd have to kind of ponder what that means. Depends on how it's said or what's the issue. If you have serious concern about me stepping up and getting it done, then quite honestly, I don't want to be the interim city manager. I think you're better off with something else.
The one thing we do need to discuss is salary. So,
I'm prepared to tell you.
okay, so you tell us what you would like to be paid. And this, I do have a question on this. So, whatever it is, it's going to be more than he's making at his current, which your current salary is $130,000.
That's correct.
So then when the interim period is over and he goes back, what salary does he go back to?
So I think that's
I'm going to address that.
Another item he wants to discuss as well.
Okay.
Well, first of all, this is rather a fascinating experience, I have to be honest.
Terrible.
Yeah,
It is.
I've negotiated my contract before, but never in public. On television. So, I've given this a lot of thought, and I've certainly talked to my wife about this, and I think you're lucky that she didn't come and negotiate on my behalf. I want to pick a number that I think is obviously fair to the community and certainly fair to myself. And there's a little bit of background here. I made over $160,000 working for the city of Shoreline. Realize it's a different city, different economy, but I'm beginning to learn, or at least question whether or not the economy is all that different, certainly at the housing level anymore. And so, I realized when I took this position here that I would make less. I'd take less because I wanted to come back to Colorado. This has been my home. But I can tell you that you got a bargain. Based on my history, and $130,000, I believe that's a bargain. And with the trouble that we're having hiring a city engineer at $120,000, again, I think you got a bargain. I'm okay with that. In fact, I think if I'm asked to be the interim and I step back into my role, whether it's you ask me or I guess decide to, I would like to go back to the 130 plus. The 5% merit increase that's, the rest of the employees are entitled to. I did not get an evaluation after 1 year. And so I guess technically I'm still on probation. So I think as part of this condition, I would like to return back to that salary and with a 5% merit. So kind of with that understanding what I made historically and perhaps how I view myself as giving the city a bargain. And I have had a conversation with Eric Juan Savage about kind of the information that he shared with you. And he didn't tell me anything I didn't know, to be honest with you. I knew that the different salaries across the different jurisdictions here, statewide and certainly in the metro area, they're going to vary a lot. And so in my opinion, in order to be fair to the community and really to myself, I'm suggesting a base salary of $158,000. And I'd throw a car allowance in there of $200 a month, and for a total of $160,000, $160,400, I guess, in total.
How much for the car allowance, did you say?
$200.
And wait a minute, so, Mike, you told me how much? 400 and...
For Michael Penny, it
Yeah.
was 400, correct?
Yeah.
I think that's a more reasonable number. In fact, if you don't even want to do the car allowance, you want to roll it into the total, fine with me. I think there is a recognition that, quite honestly, I'll be making myself much more available for a longer period of time than I ever was as the Public Works Director. I know that. So I think to me, the car allowance is some recognition of that, but if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But in my mind, 160,000, quite honestly, I think is a reasonable number. To be honest with you, I don't really want to try to negotiate anything less than that. I think if that's not satisfactory to you, then I would respect that decision, but I just assume really not try to negotiate that. I think the only thing else that I'd probably suggest is that I'm also prepared not to take any vacation for the balance of the year. I just recognize what the work's going to be involved here. And so any kind of vacation that I have left would just be carried into next year. According to our policy, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so I think in this particular case, I don't see myself taking a lot of vacation time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Council, Mike, I'm assuming you want us to give you a recommendation for a resolution for next week.
Correct.
So, Council, discussion? First, I think discussion on whether or not we want to offer the opportunity to Mark, or if we want to pursue something else, or if we want to hold off on offering and pursue something else, and then you got to look at both of those options. Decision, we had mentioned what we've, I think, loosely called circuit riders. We have not looked into that. We've not talked about some of the real applicability of how quickly we could get someone, talk to someone, what their price ranges are. Availability. So is there any, does anybody want to have a little discussion about that?
Would. Nothing against Mark at this point in time, but as I said last week, our experience in single sourcing this, even though my preference would be someone from the inside, but not to look at other options, so that in fact we're making a decision that's not a null set versus opportunity. Or a lot that's on Mark's plate, recognized. There's a lot of entanglements and partnerships that are outside the city that have to deal with our public works. Full-time job, I still look at it. Very important, and at least priorities that come back. My conversations with folks, as well as that goes in the survey, there's a lot of things that are to at least not, thank you.
Don't start over.
He probably picked it up some, so, and to at least not take a look at what another option would be. I think would be a mistake. It's not to say that Mark might not do a good job. It's just being in a position to say, hey, let's look at least what the alternative might be.
Well, do we have any idea what the cost of a circuit rider is even, or what the time, I mean, if the decision was made to go circuit rider, how long would it take to get one on board and come walk in the door here? I mean, we're looking at roughly 6 months until we could get a permanent quote unquote city manager. how long would it take to get a circuit rider in and running?
It would depend on who's out there, who's available, their availability, their willingness, and then the number that they throw out to take on this role and for how long. So there's a lot of variables there that I can't really answer your question without actually going out and doing the work of finding out who's there. I have talked to Sam Mamet at CML. He knows those folks that are available to do this interim city management work. There are probably 4 or 5 that he could name off the top of his head that could do the job. Some of them were tied up in other cities doing work, or they had just completed. It's summer. A lot of them are retired already and they don't want to work the summers. It depends. It absolutely depends on who's out there and what's their availability.
Understood.
And the number that they throw out, this is short-term work and it's high-pressure stuff, and they've got to come in and run a large organization. So I wouldn't be surprised that it's comparable to what Mark's thrown out in addition to his salary.
Because I think, we talked a little bit about the merits of a circuit rider versus someone from inside. And one of the pluses is a question that I asked you earlier, Mark, and that's that I think someone from totally outside the organization may sometimes be in a better position to assess strengths and weaknesses than someone who's been immersed in the culture for a period of time. I think Mark is very well qualified, and I'm very impressed. I just think we need to be aware of that capability and make that decision based on the fact that may be there. Having said that, though, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns on the circuit rider side. We have Mark, who's certainly a high-quality known, and have to look at the 450 employees we've got here now who have expressed through you, Mike, that they've been through a lot of turmoil. It's very unsettling right now, and I think that by putting Mark in the position, it would help to stabilize that situation. I think there's, from what I understand, a lot of respect for Mark, and that is certainly got to be considered. So we need to consider both how well this person, whatever our short-term solution is, works for council, but also with staff. And that's a big piece of the pie. And I think for the staff side, we'd be well-served to put Mark in the position. I think, my only concern is the ability to truly evaluate strengths and weaknesses within an organization with someone from within. So I don't know what other people think in that respect, but that's kind of my take on the situation. I'd be very pleased to have Mark step in, but I just throw that out.
I'm okay with looking for a way to come to an agreement with Mark for many of the reasons you just said, too, is that he is a known entity within our city staff. Now, I haven't talked to a lot of city staff, I'll admit. Some of you apparently have, I haven't. I know you're well respected. With our legal issues that we have going on right now, I think you at least are on board with some of them. I think while it is a big job, you can handle it. I have confidence that you can handle it. I've listened to you speak about your asset management, planning. Really, this is about planning and bringing it all together. I also think that evaluating what we have, you've been probably doing that since you've been here, evaluating what we have, what you like and what you don't like. And I think you said, well, you wouldn't make, big changes. I imagine you might change some things, as you said, with meetings or whatever. So I support the idea of finding a way to come to an agreement with Mark.
Peggy?
I agree with Jerry, although I would say what Mark told us wasn't so much what he liked and what he didn't like as what he saw working well and what he saw wasn't working well or could benefit from some improvements. And it wasn't in the air stuff. It was very focused examination of things. So I think we would be well advised, it would be a good move to appoint Mark interim. And he has said that he would love to go back to what he's been doing. And, has no expectations of doing anything other than eventually than what he's been doing, from my perspective, so well while he's been here. So I support negotiating here. So.
Okay. Well, I wish we had pursued the circuit rider as an option for us even a couple of weeks ago when we talked about it, because I think it's something that would be a good opportunity for us to evaluate those options as we've discussed. The whole idea of just, one person on staff says that he'll do it, and boom, we put him in. And I think that we're probably not doing ourselves the type of fair look that we should and that I wish we would. And I do respect staff's opinion. I've talked to Mike about this, and he has mentioned that because it is someone that they know and they feel more comfortable with and not have to relearn someone's personality and their idiosyncrasies and that type of thing, that the transition would be smoother, would be more graceful, would be easier, would help keep morale at a better level. Those are really, really important, particularly given the turmoil over the last month. And so I think that weighs heavily on my decision. I do think that, I have always liked you, Mark. I've always appreciated your work. I thought that you were a perfect hire for the Public Works Department, and I still do. I am very uncomfortable with watching you move out of that department into city manager position. City manager position is a full-time job. Yours was a full-time job. I'm very uncomfortable with you saying you're not going to take vacation. You will take vacation. Even if it's one day a week or something like that, people need a breather. They need a break away. I really have discomfort with that. I think you're taking a huge bite out of both of those. You feel comfortable doing it, but I think it's going to be. I think it's challenging, and I think that if we do put you in as the position, I think council is going to need to be very, very honest with you, as you will be with us, if we start to see some concerns. And I think there needs to be, at the very least, a plan B, which doesn't mean, you go away or anything. But if you start to see that there's some stress, issues with doing both of these jobs, we need you to start thinking about how you solve that. So with just my caveat that I would have rather we had a broader search, I will at this point go ahead and weigh in on the support of Mark. So we have the support. We need to discuss the salary. Mark has said it's somewhat not negotiable. I added somewhat. Somewhat not negotiable. Just to reiterate, Penny's salary was $177,777, and I don't know how we got to that perfectly.
Yeah.
You
777.
were on the committee that recommended it.
It was a percentage, and it ended up being at this. Mark's current salary is $130,000. A 15% increase, which is what is generally done in organizations such as ours, would take him to $149,500. When you look at the market rate, the Denver Boulder area for city managers, the minimum is 145, and change in the max is 219. The weighted average then is about 184,000. Mark has asked for, with a car allowance, in the neighborhood of $160,000. So that would be over $10,000 more than the 15% increase, and it would also be $15,000 more than a minimum city manager position. So I guess we'll just go around the room, and if there's a problem with, or if a council member has another number that they want to throw out, and some discussion on that.
I think his car allowance at 200 is very reasonable. I mean, we have been paying 400, so I'm okay with the numbers we've been given.
Okay, you're okay with 158?
Plus
Bill?
car allowance.
Plus the car allowance.
I have no problem with his ask.
I don't have a problem with this ask, but I've got to give you a hard time because as a public works director, you're all over the city. As a city manager, you're mostly here.
He has a city car, though.
So you have a city car? Is that right? Oh, from the
Or you
fleet.
drive, don't you ride a
From the
fleet car?
vehicles, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I drive one of the pool vehicles. I drive one of the pool vehicles now, if it's available, but yeah, sometimes I'll take my vehicle, but
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, if it's half a penny's what the regular one was, I don't have a problem with it.
I would not be taking a pool vehicle anymore if that's, I'm being asked to be the city manager, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, and just a point on the car allowance issue, part of the, and we've gone around and around, every year we go around with these car allowances, and part of the idea with the car allowance is that it's just a flat rate that they get. And so they're not keeping track of mileage. If they go over that, they go over it. If they go under it, they go under it. There's just constant, meetings here, meetings there, whatever. So it helps to ease the paperwork and the logging in more than anything. So that's why car allowance says everybody wants a car allowance. It's mostly because you don't want to keep track of your miles.
That's correct.
Peggy, where are you at?
I'm supportive.
Bill,
He said I have no problem with his ask.
you have no problem with that?
Right.
Okay.
Cool. We're done.
All right, then we will have staff bring back an offer for 1 year maximum, 158,000 base with a $200 car allowance, effective
It will be, well,
date,
the
the 19th?
The 19th.
Assuming it gets approved, yeah.
Yeah, assuming approved.
Okay. Mike, you have two?
I have a couple, just a quick reminders.
Got to say thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, you forgot to say thank you. No,
If I may, do you mind if I just say a couple of words?
no, that's fine.
Please.
It truly is an honor, and I have the highest regard for each and every one of you. I realize your work is hard, and I realize that the change that has occurred is a very difficult time. So believe me, I am going to put my heart and soul into this. I will take your advice, Debbie. I will take a little vacation, but I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to make this successful for you, for the organization.
Thanks, Mark. And you have our full support, so.
And I'll add too, I'm more than happy to support whoever you put in the role, and I'm happy to support Mark in this role. And we've discussed some of this and the logistics of how things may play out, and what we've discussed, more than willing to do. So more than willing to help Mark. The two reminders I wanted to bring up before we go, and then just one announcement. Mark touched on the council priorities. I sent out an email last week. If you could get those lists of your individual council priorities to me to be collected for that, your next study session, I think it's on the 26th. So the 26th. And if you could send those to Becky Fye in our office, by July 18th, which I think is next Monday. And then lastly, urban renewal questions. I've scheduled those study sessions for the 2 study sessions in August. If you have questions specifically on urban renewal that you want us to address, please send those to me as soon as possible so we can get those addressed, and we can present that on the first study session and then do any follow-up that we need to do on the second study session. And this weekend, well, actually tonight is my son's 10th anniversary, my oldest son. I have another son who's younger than that, but so, and then tomorrow is my 15th wedding anniversary. So this weekend, we're taking a family vacation. So I'm gone from Thursday afternoon through the weekend. So don't try to reach me.
He knows how to take vacation. Okay,
Congratulations. Oh, thank you.
all right, we're done.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.